a very disciplined approach of how to go to market. There's a lot of research on this topic. I've been a big fan of Robert Cooper. He's certainly not the only author or authority on this. And I'm just sharing one of his data points to put some meat on the bones of this assertion that there are ways that you can go about reducing your risk on a new product. So in one of his books, he talked about both the ultimate success rate of a new product, as well as the market share that that product captured as a function of literally how much homework a company put into the product and the idea behind it and the state of the market and so forth in advance of the product launch. And so that's a big part of what's driving the presentation I'll be sharing with you today. So fundamentally, what's at the heart of this is that you have a value proposition. You've created a product or you're working on an idea and you believe that it's going to have some value in a marketplace, or more probably in some segment of the marketplace, some specialized segment where the needs, the expectations, and the wants of buyers in that market or in that market segment are clearly defined and understood. And so this is where I have seen, in terms of a pattern, this is where I have seen the biggest breakdown in the thinking of early stage companies. And not just the thinking, but the execution that misses this really important step. So as entrepreneurs, what I've found is that the easiest trap we can fall into is becoming enamored with our own ideas. And it's sort of inherent in the work that gets done, right? You've got passion around something, you see it as a better way, it's clear to you that it's a better way, and we fall in love with the idea. And we come to see the world and the marketplace more and more from that somewhat insular point of view, which is inside out. It's from inside our minds, and inside our labs, and inside our offices, out into the marketplace. And one of the most difficult challenges we face is seeing a new product idea from the outside in. That is, from the vantage point of the prospective customer. So regardless of whether we're selling a consumer product or service, or something that's purchased by institutional buyers, hospitals, businesses, governments, or any B2B or B2G purchaser, we and our customers enter into a voluntary relationship of exchange. And that exchange takes place when they provide us with money and we provide them with our product or service. And it's a voluntary relationship, of course, that they can opt into and out of at any time. So this is the basis, really, of a marketing frame of reference into business and into product management. And those products need to deliver more value than the alternative solutions available. First of all, they need to deliver more value than the money a customer exchanges, of course, but they also need to deliver more value than the alternative solutions available to a problem or an opportunity that a prospective customer has. As well, our products need to deliver more value than the alternative uses of that capital that a customer has to deploy. And from a really valuable executive program I attended at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, it was all in customer value management. And the long-term winners in a market are those companies that come to understand customer value better than anybody else in the competitive environment. Okay. And customer value tends to fall in one of these 5 domains that you see here. There's either some economic value. I'm going to go through each one of these very briefly in a moment, but there's economic value. There's product performance value that's inherent in the product, or there's some value to you or your competitors as suppliers, or there's some specific buyer motivation or goal that's a source of value. And lastly, there can be situational drivers of value. And so I want to just share with you, and given the time we have today, I won't go into detail on this, but I'll just let you take a look at the slide and I'll talk about each one of these 5 very generally. And these are as well included in the copy of the slides that you'll be getting from the session today. But economic value is the source that most people think of most immediately. So it's like, who's got the lowest cost product? Or is it lowest total cost of ownership that can give you a winning position? Or the ability to deliver a really compelling ROI on an investment? So here are 12 different sources of economic value. Again, you can just scan those and think about them. But this is the primary source of value that most suppliers think about, and that also a great many customers, if not all of them, think about whether or not it's their highest priority, but it's one of the sources that they will always look at. And so this is something that needs to be given significant thought. The second, of course, is the performance of the product or service that you offer. Is it the fastest? Does it offer the best feature set? Is it delivering the highest technical performance? All these sources of product performance value. A third is, the value of individual suppliers. So this is where you're, particularly in industries where the brand and the reputation of a company come into play. Regardless of what stage you're at in the development of your company, you have a brand and you come to be known in your market for the value that you deliver as a supplier. And so there are different sources into like what you can convey about yourself as a business that is a real source of value. Okay, the fourth of those 5, again, is the buyer's motivation and or goals. So again, this could be any of the following 9 or even more dimensions of the buyer's motivation and value. So, status, of course, is one in the consumer product space. It even plays some into the B2B space, but all sorts of like buyer motivations and specific things that buyers are looking for. And the better you can understand those, the more tightly you can align with a specific motivation and a specific goal that a prospective buyer or a segment of the market may have. And this is really, this is in market segmentation, this is known as a psychographic segmentation methodology for how you can dial into a market and deliver competitively superior value to a segment of the market. And then finally here, there are just situational drivers, right? In any company or even sometimes a segment of the market, there will be some very specific situational drivers that you can attune yourself to. So I offer that summary just as a very quick 30,000-foot flyby on customer value management and the 5 sources of value that you should be thinking about as you're developing a product. Again, you're enthused about your product, the idea that you're going to bring to the market, and starting to look at it from the vantage point of someone who's going to be exchanging their money and sometimes more importantly, their time that they're investing with you and your competitors in solving a specific problem or capturing some kind of opportunity. Okay, so my next section here is on some case studies, and I'm going to share 2. These I love sharing these stories and giving this presentation because, again, these are two companies out of three that I've worked with in the Portland area that became the fastest growing company in Portland, Oregon for a period of at least 1 year. And that fastest is something that I just pulled from the Portland Business Journal's list of fastest growing companies. They just published their fastest growing list in the latest edition. And in fact, just as a side note, that's a newspaper that I helped start a long time ago. So anyway, these three companies that I've worked with, two of which I'm including in case studies here, were not only fast growing, they were fast growing because they had really smart people, really strong executive teams. And in each of the three situations, there was a major blunder and a big chunk of money dumped into a new product idea that turned out to be a disaster. And the question I came to is like, how do so many smart people make just so fundamentally poor decisions that lead to significant financial consequences for their business? So the first case study I'm going to share is a company called Medical Logic. And this is a pretty old story, but the lesson continues. This lesson repeats itself absolutely through to the present. And the most recent company that I worked for full time repeated the same problem, as did the second case study I'll share with you in a moment. So Medical Logic was a business that was bringing the first generation of software into medical offices for the management of clinical patient records. And some of you may be old enough to remember that your medical records used to be in these manila folders, and there were file rooms full of manila folders, and all of these handwritten notes or printed out charts from dictations and then transcription and then printing. Was a completely inefficient pre-digital method for capturing information and managing it. And you really couldn't do much with that information because you couldn't aggregate it. You couldn't look at your entire patient population and run a quick summary of who was overdue for a mammogram, who was overdue for some sort of screening, what sort of drugs were potentially interacting. So we were one of the early players in that medical record software business, and it was a huge market, right? At the time, there were something like 700,000 physicians in practice in the US. And if we looked at just the clinically based as opposed to hospital based and other ways of sorting it, there were over 500,000 doctors that could be using software to capture patient records and just automate a lot of labor intensive work. So it was a new product, a medical record software product coming into this market with huge upside. And I was really fortunate in that I was employee number 13 at this company. And so under $1 million in revenue, certainly when I joined. But we had some venture capital and a very aggressive, hungry management team that had taken another company from startup to IPO. Literally at the time, it was the fastest startup to IPO in American business history. It was Mentor Graphics here in the Portland area. So this is about either my second or third year with the company. We had $2.7 million in revenue. We were not close to profitability. Every year we spent twice as much money as we brought in revenue, but the whole thing was being built with an eye toward an IPO. So at the time, the market was flooded with competition. It was highly fragmented, all these startups coming in with software to automate patient charts. And so the logic that was playing out within our company was that we needed to make something in the way of a product enhancement that would really differentiate us from the competition. Now, that was a fundamental assumption that was not ever validated by anybody. So we decided to make a $1 million bet. Again, this is a company with 2.7 million in revenue. We made a $1 million bet on a new product enhancement, not just a new product, but a new product feature. Okay, so again, just a little bit about the best and the brightest there. It was really just some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And I'll go halfway down through the bullet points here because I've spoken to some of these points already. But our primary entry point into the market, if you will, or the lead bowling pin we were looking to tip us into other bowling pins, into other segments of the clinical market, was we were targeting internists. And at the time, of course, software was new. The market penetration was literally in the low single digits. Like no doctors except really kind of digital pioneers, software pioneers, were doing anything to record their medical records on software. So we faced that classic crossing the chasm challenge. For any of you who have read those books by Jeffrey Moore, we were like, how do we go from, first of all, getting early adopters to then crossing that chasm into an early mainstream market where there's this big sucking sound of the main segment of the middle of the market starting to pull your product in. Okay, so that was our market challenge, was like getting initial market acceptance. And our thinking as an executive team was that we need to more highly differentiate our product because the market is so highly fragmented with competition. That was a fundamental flaw in our thinking. So the specific idea that we had was, we called it consult logic. So again, we had a brand strategy and structure better than any of our competitors in terms of its logic. And we named it Consult Logic as part of a product suite and modules. And this module specifically was to give internists and primary care physicians referral guidelines right at the point of care. So this was developed at Johns Hopkins Medical School, and it was the brainchild really of their medical informaticists and ours. We had two of the smartest medical doctors who both had graduate degrees in either medical informatics or engineering. So we were really like super techie doctors in leadership roles. Okay, and Johns Hopkins Medical School is not the mainstream of the market by any means. They are like on the pioneering frontier of what's happening in all segments of clinical practice. So we had this idea of referral guidelines built into the software being developed at Johns Hopkins that would help primary care doctors at the point of care know when to refer someone to a specialist. And that sounded all reasonable and that nobody else had it. And so the leadership at our company said, absolutely, let's bolt this on, build it into our offering, and we're going to put $1 million into doing it. And what happened was like lighting fire to a bunch of money. So first of all, as I mentioned, doctors weren't using point of care decision support in software. In fact, they weren't even using software. And they weren't about to be told what to do by a software module that only complicated their adoption and use. Like we were so far down the market adoption curve in this idea that it was like market timing is everything. And so it was a solution to a problem that nobody in the market perceived themselves as having. And what we were doing is we were building the carbon fiber bike for Lance Armstrong when what the market needed was a product on training wheels. Think back 30 years ago to when this was happening. even, yeah, 30 years ago. Like doctors are, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. These people are not using software. They don't want to use software. They've been working for 20, 25, 30 years, writing notes on patient charts and dictating into their dictaphones. And so they couldn't even, like, none of these clinics could figure out how to use software. Do they use it in their exam rooms? Is the doctor taking notes in there? How does the doctor have a computer set up in their exam room? Or do they wait and dictate and then have it come in outside of their office? None of that was working. So overall, nobody in the market believed they had the problem we were trying to solve. And therefore, it wasn't an urgent problem. It wasn't a pervasive problem. And they weren't willing to pay to solve it. And so we started again from the viewpoint of what is possible instead of the viewpoint of what really provides customer value. And we started to see that when, by the way, when we took our engineering team out into the marketplace and we went on a tour and visited customers and started hearing from them that, like, guys, if you want us to use software, again, this is 30 years ago. It's like, give us training wheels. We need something really simple. And I'm going to share a framework with you after the next case study in, like, what that looks like. So it's one of the problems when you have really smart, technically advanced people working in leadership roles of a company. Not that you don't want those people, but you want to hedge the risk of their brilliance being too far ahead of the marketplace. And that's a big part of what this presentation is about and the methodology that I'll share with you. All right, Medical Logic was the darling of Portland. Everybody wrote about us. All the industry trade press wrote about us. Company went public. We had a market valuation or market cap of $1.8 billion on $20 million in revenue, and a loss that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million on that $20 million in revenue. This thing went in the classic dot-com bubble. The stock peaked at, I think, at $54 a share. Everybody in the company was locked up. They couldn't sell their shares, of course. And the thing crashed all the way down. I can't remember if it fell to 25 cents or 10 cents a share, but it was delisted by the NASDAQ. The company, we had raised like 7, 8 rounds of money before the IPO, and everybody lost their shirts on this investment. So this was from the Portland Business Journal. I just thought it was a telling end to the story, because that's how I heard about Medical Logic in the very first place when they got their first round of venture capital. And I said, I'm going to go to work with these guys. And so that's what I did. All right. So anyway, the company got delisted. It finally sold all of its assets to GE Medical, I think for the sum of like $10 million or something. Okay. Just want to do a quick check-in with the folks at OBI. Are you hearing me okay? Everything's still going okay with the visuals, so forth?
Yeah, everything's fantastic.
All right, great.
Ryan chimed in. He wants to know, who were the medical informaticists that you worked with?
Uh, all right, I'm not going to name people. Just for liability reasons, there's a lot of information I'm kind of scrubbing from here. I'm not going to name the people in Portland, but they were smart people. And the people at Johns Hopkins, uh, Leidenheim, Dr. Leidenheim, forget his first name. He was the guy who took the lead on it. Okay, my second case study was with a company that's still in business, ID Experts, and I went to work there for a CEO who I had worked for at a prior company when he was a executive VP of, actually had two significant roles, executive team roles of different positions. But he went to work as the CEO of ID Experts, and they provided identity protection and recovery services primarily for companies. So when there's a breach, they help companies with the breach and recovery from it. But they also had a consumer side product. And this was about, I don't know, 10 years ago. Obviously a big market then, growing, identity theft and, all of those kind of hacking incidents are just prolific, growing by God only knows what percentage every year now, but they were growing rapidly then. The company faced a classic, what I call a challenger brand battle, because we weren't the biggest competitor in this field. In fact, we were one of the smaller ones. But we had a couple valuable contracts. And the risk was that we had 80% of our revenue came from one customer. And most of the rest, but not all of it, but most of the rest of the revenue came from a second customer who also generated 50% of our profit. And that customer left, by the way. When you are that highly concentrated in the marketplace and the customer base, you're at real risk. So anyway, they had a big idea. It was called MIDAS, and that's an acronym for Medical Identity Alert System. And it was an alert for, again, medical identity theft. It was the CEO's idea. And the problem space is that about 2.3 million Americans were victimized by medical identity theft every year. If you're not familiar with that, medical identity theft is just somebody steals your health insurance information and they get care using your member number and your group number. And it happened up until that time. It was happening a lot. Problem was growing at 15% a year. And it was like, my God, we're in the medical identity, or we're in the identity protection space, and there's this big medical problem. Like, let's develop something for it. So big personal cost. Like, people get tangled up in all kinds of stuff when their medical identity is stolen. They start getting billed for things that were services delivered to somebody else in doctors' offices and even in hospitals. We had tons of anecdotal stories about people giving birth, mothers giving birth to their babies in hospitals under somebody else's insurance. And, the stories that we used to the hilt in our marketing were prolific, all kinds of horror stories. So our target market was the health insurers, who are the ones financially responsible much of the time for the medical bills, or self-insured employers, or what are known more today as self-funded employers, who take on the financial risk of their own medical claims. And they use the insurance companies just to administer their claims processing. Okay, so that was our primary market focus. And we developed this in-house app called MIDAS, and it was for basically what I call an explanation of benefits on steroids. So you get an EOB form. Some of you still get them in the mail. Some of you get them by email, but you get this explanation of benefits form for every service that you get. And the form comes from your insurance company. So I'll just ask you for the moment here and put it on like the back burner as we talk, but how many of you actually look at your explanation of benefits forms? And if you do look at it, can you make sense out of it? We'll come back to that. Okay, so none of our competitors, by the way, had anything like this. So of course we thought, well, I didn't, and you'll see in a moment why. But the company thought this was a great idea. Big problem, none of our competitors have a solution to the problem. Those are a couple of the key components of what you want when you're bringing a new product to market. But they're only a couple of the major components. Okay, so a new marketing guy walks into a company. That happened to be me. My former executive colleague asked me to come in and basically take this thing that had been languishing and turn it into a business. So I got in there and I started looking around and it's like, oh my God, this thing had appeal. And the CEO was so articulate in explaining the value, and he was so enthused about what the product did and I just wanted to work with him again too. And I'd been working for 2 years in Florida, commuting from Portland. So I wanted to be back here living and working in the same city. So anyway, I went to work for him. with the charge of like, hey, fix this thing, bring it to life. And so what I found was that they had a sales guy dedicated to this product for 4 years. And we had two customers who were actually friends of the company, and they weren't really using the product and they weren't really even paying for it. And we couldn't get any more than two friends of the family, basically, to try this thing. And we had invested, the company had invested prior to getting there, $1 million again in building out this thing and then trying to sell it into the marketplace. And I'm at the point where it's like, okay, if we can't even interest prospective customers in taking it for free, we've got a serious problem. And compounding the problem was that we had a major private equity firm invest in the company in large part because of this concept, because no one else had it. And a lot of you are going to be looking for money or are looking for money right now. And like, be careful what you wish for, because we had a PE firm come in and they had control of the company now. Okay. And they were a significant PE investor. So there we were. My marching order again was, hey, fix this. So I said, look, there's some homework here. Go back to the Robert Cooper slide in your mind at the beginning of this presentation, that the more homework you do and the better the homework, the better your odds of success. Well, at this point in my career, 10 years ago, I knew what that homework looked like. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you in a minute. I knew how to go in and like validate assumptions, which I hadn't learned earlier in my career, the first time this thing happened with medical logic. And so what I did is I put together a panel of self-insured employers, health insurance companies, and brokers. And I went out and I did deep dive interviews with them. And I came back and I reported like my findings. And it was like, folks, insurers and self-insured employers don't buy one-off widgets like we have. They buy bundles. And by the way, they don't perceive that they have a problem around medical identity theft. So we're going to be in the evangelical sales mode, not the problem-solving mode for people. When I say that they buy bundles and not widgets, it was like trying to sell in the early years of word processing software, trying to sell a spell checker, right? Nobody buys a spell checker. They expect it to be built into Microsoft Word or Office or whatever, Google Docs. So we had this thing where we just thought, okay, this brilliant idea is going to be sellable. And the market was saying, we don't buy widgets, okay? We buy solutions. And the self-funded employers said, hey, wait a minute, the insurers should be monitoring this and taking care of it and protecting us. And the insurers said privately, well, we don't really care about this because A, we don't see it as a big problem. And B, if it increases our costs, our pricing is just based on cost plus. And so companies and employers are accustomed to paying a ton of money for health insurance. They know that it goes up by an egregious amount every year. And we're just going to do, we're going to continue to do our pricing on, we pay for medical claims, we have an administrative cost, and we charge our customers that plus a margin on top for administration and our margin. So they just like, okay, the self-funded employers are they're at their financial risk, and we don't, I think this is not something that we lose sleep over. In fact, most of them weren't even thinking about it. So there were a lot of assumptions that we had as a business behind this product idea. And every new product has implicit assumptions behind it. And it's imperative that you understand what those implicit assumptions are. So our first one was that employers would mandate that employees use this app. So this is where I want to go back to the question of like, how many of you actually put this into the chat if you would. How many of you actually read your explanation of benefits form that comes to you either in the mail, email, or whatever other format you get it? Just put in chat, yes or no. And I will ask Somebody from OBI, if you can like look at those and tell me whatever percentage split it looks like, just in rough terms. Okay, so our first assumption was that employers would mandate that employees use it. By the way, our company had it available and we didn't mandate that employees use it. And so nobody did. Okay, assumption number two, that that the employees and dependents would comply with that mandate, even if an employer A did mandate it, B would the employee and their dependents actually use it, and then C, that employee usage would continue even with the lack of reward for using it virtually all the time. So if employees used it, would they even be able to find fraud in billing? Maybe once in a while. But like, how would you know if you'd gone to the ER and the health system coded it a level 5 ER visit and it was legitimately a level 3? I don't think many of us know how to make that discernment. Okay, so there were all these assumptions built in. And then I said, okay, guys, we need to think through, like going back to the sources of value. The first one I shared was economic value. I said, we need to do some customer value modeling here because like this thing's getting no traction and you've got a guy selling it and he's been selling it for 4 years and nobody's buying. Let's make some assumptions here and run some data. So I just took Intel as an example because they're publicly traded, they're in our backyard, and it's easy to get the data. So at that time, Intel had revenue of about $63 billion and 106,000 employees. So I just said, let's use some back of the envelope numbers and just say the health benefits cost is $6,000 per FTE, which is a pretty good approximation. And let's assume that fraudulent claims are 1 in 1,000. I said, okay, let's just do the math. So that's $636,000 worth of fraudulent claims at a company with revenue of $63 billion. And I said, now let's assume that half of the employees use the app, which I thought was generous, and that they detect half of the fraudulent claims that show up. There's a bottom line using those assumptions. And you can play with the numbers, but any way you slice it, you've got a bottom line number here, saving $159,000 for Intel. That's what they spend on coffee per day. They probably spend more. Like Intel is not going to look to change its whole employee relationship management contract to save $159,000. And even if you're not Intel, if you've got $60 million in revenue, the math still works out so that the problem and the utilization and the savings are just like way more squeezed than the juice that comes out. Okay, so as I delivered at the end of a few months of this process of going through the validation process, one of the executives looks around the room. It was very somber. Nobody had said a word. And then the first thing that was spoken after about 30 seconds of silence was one of the senior executives saying, somebody should have done this 4 years ago. It really turned out to be a challenge for the company. All right, there's not enough time to go through it all and how we tried to salvage it and all of that. And I left the company shortly after. But why this product and the Consult Logic product failed? It's just product management 101. First of all, who believed or felt they had a problem? In neither of those cases had we validated that somebody felt like they had a problem. Okay, and therefore they weren't looking at something that was urgent. It wasn't a marketplace opportunity or problem that was pervasive, and they weren't willing to pay to prevent or solve that problem. These are 3 of the biggest questions, 4 of the biggest questions, really, that you need to ask yourself as you're innovating in the product space. Who believes they have a problem or a big opportunity that can be captured with a solution? How urgent is it? How pervasive is it? And what is their willingness to pay to prevent or solve the problem? Okay, both of these ideas from the case studies I've shared started from, again, the viewpoint of what's possible instead of what provides customer value. All right, so I'm going to skip through this slide so we can get to like, how do you actually do this? Because I've covered these points already on the last couple slides. Okay, So how to go about doing this? The new concept validation process is part art, part science, and always, always important to do. The last company I worked for, which I don't have time to present here, failed to do it on a product. Same story played out. Just a bunch of organizational cycles and a chunk of money wasted. You start with a team, you put together a team to do the validation project. And there's typically, as you see right in the middle, a core team. And that can be a couple people, 3 people, whatever, product engineering, marketing, product management, or somebody who's actually going to be responsible and accountable for driving this through to success. And then you build out a more fully developed team as kind of a stakeholder group. And this could be these, stakeholders from product, sales, depends on the size of your company, but you build out a team that makes sense within your environment. And then you start with an awareness that it's important to talk with customers, but there's importance in having a specific methodology to like how you hold those conversations. So just talking to customers, smart people talking to customers gets you half of the way there. And in each of the incidents I just shared, in all 3 of those, like nobody was talking to, even just having conversations, educated conversations with customers. But the new concept validation process starts like at 12 o'clock on the clock here is the top formulating hypotheses around your strong intuition. And every one of these companies, again, had smart people, they had strong intuition, but you start with some hypotheses that you can test. Like, what are customers valuing? What's our product idea? And then you do, you can look at the rest of the questions, but you go clockwise around here into developing, like, how do we prototype this or put together some sort of presentation so that we can actually sit down with a potential buyer and go through a communication and pitch it as if we were actually trying to sell it into a market, but you're not trying to generate revenue here. It's not a revenue generating exercise. It's you want to get these prospective customers to commit to something with you. For example, to being part of an early adopter program or a pilot program where you could even give them the product for free for some period of time in return for an exchange of data or something that you would value. And so you just go through this, and then if they are unwilling to commit to taking a product for free, that's a signal to explore and not to try to sell over. Like, oh my God, I took the CEO on one of my stakeholder meetings, and it was the first and only one I took him to. Because as soon as we started getting reservations and reluctance and objections to the idea, the CEO like started beating up on the guy and like, almost telling him, can't you see the obvious value to what we have here? And it was like, it broke the meeting. These meetings are about gaining intelligence and understanding objections from the customer's point of view, because you can't go out and do this. You can't afford to go out and do this with hundreds of people, right? And I'll show you kind of like how the phases go on the next 1 or 2 slides, but these are precious meetings. The value coming back to you is the education you get, not the revenue you get. Okay, so anyway, that's the process at a real high level. You prototype it, or you create a presentation or something that allows you to show it with stakeholders. You give a pitch, but it's not a hardcore sales pitch. You just try to present the value and then test them on your value assumptions and say, hey, would you like to pilot with us on this and be one of our, whatever, 5 early adopters or our 5 pilot program members, and exchange for, we get your data or whatever. Okay. So the meetings themselves, just a little bit more into kind of the guts of those meetings. so you schedule, you conduct them. So you got to like have some administrative support along the way to get these scheduled. You can do them roughly in an hour or so. And that's, if you can get people to spend an hour with you, it's a generous extension of their time. And therefore, you sometimes in some industries, you have to compensate people for their time. And in some, you don't. And sometimes you'll have enough friends in the marketplace that if you feel like they'll give you honest feedback, and maybe your friends will actually be more honest with you than non-friends, but you got to get people for about an hour. And it helps to have a short call first of about 15 minutes, just to kind of set up the validation meeting. So you set expectations, they know what's going to happen. They can think through after the conversation who to bring in for their side. And then again, at the end of these meetings, you want to ask for, quote, an order to participate in some sort of early partner program or something where you get them to engage with you in a partnership that's not so much about revenue generation. And then when they decline, it's really like that's where your education begins, is to understand what's going on. And I'll show you again in a couple slides of like the kinds of things to look for. Okay, so the heart of a validation meeting follows, this kind of outline here that I've already talked to in the previous couple slides. You want them to be very honest and open. You can pitch your product, but share the limitations. Share, if you want, kind of a roadmap of where you see it going. If you have some sort of customer value calculator, share those kinds of things. Talk about pricing, what you're thinking about, how you're going to price it. Find out from them, what's the lowest price you think would even make this seem like a real product, and what's the highest price beyond which you would just say, no, I'm not even going to think about it. And then what's an appropriate price, do you think, based upon the value you get from it? Those kinds of questions. Okay. Some of the generic buckets that your questions should come from are, you want to understand what's the relative advantage of your product. So going back again to like the second or third slide I opened the presentation with, customers will make a choice based upon their best interest, not yours. And they want to know, A, do you deliver more value than I'm giving up in my purchase price? B, are you delivering more value to me than the alternative solutions available to me? And C, is your product category even a valuable source of something to our business? Or would I be better off as the CEO or CFO or whoever putting my money into something entirely different? Okay, so you want to know your relative advantage. You want to know, again, how compatible your solution is with how their world works. So in the story of medical logic, like we were creating this with Johns Hopkins, we were creating a solution that's like, it's not compatible with their workflow. Like we were, again, building that carbon fiber racing bike for Lance Armstrong when they needed a little bike with training wheels. Okay, the third bucket here is observability. Can they actually see and feel and witness the value that you're delivering? And fourth is the complexity of it. So even if it's compatible and you have relative advantages, it's like, you get those other advantages, but it's an IQ test to adopt and use your product, or even to give it a trial, you got a speed bump coming out of the chutes. So you need to do everything you can to minimize the complexity so that they can at least try it and get into your partnership. Okay, validation is an iterative process. So when I said a few minutes ago, like how many of these meetings can you hold? Generally, I recommend doing 3 waves. And in the first wave, it's 4 or 5 people where you're like kicking off and testing your early hypotheses. And you start to learn a lot. And then you say, okay, maybe we need to refine our questioning. And in the second phase of interviews, you can add some questions or refine some questions and more tightly test your hypotheses or even test out new ones. And then you've got a third wave of like your final 4 or 5 interviews where you're integrating your learning from the prior interviews, and you're able, with 12 to 15 interviews, to start developing, in many instances, a really strong understanding of the value you would deliver or that you would not deliver and where you're getting tripped up. And so when you do these kinds of validation projects, think about them in terms of waves. And then after you hold your validation meetings, you do a debrief. And you just kind of go through, like you've got a checklist of things. You've taken notes. That's why you want to have at least 2 people on your company side doing these so people can compare notes. Capture those notes in any format that works for you. Spreadsheets, whatever. And look at what the good news and bad news was from the interview, what the key learnings and insights were, like what came out of the tests of your value proposition, what are the objections and obstacles. Pull any key quote. Like, these are often great because, like, you'll hear people say things and they're just so golden. You think, we got to use that in our marketing when we get downstream, or, hey, this is showing us the ridiculousness of our idea, or whatever. But you'll often get these just gems of quotes. Okay, and then you rate the customer on an A through F in terms of their willingness to buy. And then you also want to know what would have to be changed to get them from a D or an F to, or maybe even a C, to an A or a B. Okay, well, that's the key learning. And then after this is the discovery phase, the validation, and then you make your decision. Are you going to continue with your product as planned? Are you going to kill the idea? Are you going to accelerate the idea? Are you going to pivot and do something different? And then, defining your messaging. If you are going to continue, the messaging and pricing strategy are really well fed by using this process. And then, it's discover, decide, define, and deliver, kind of the sequence of events for you in this process. Okay, this has been great. We are just about at the end of the hour. I was told at the beginning that if we ended up going over an hour, for people who want to stay, we could do that, or I could do that. We have a couple minutes left, I see here, before the end of the session, but I would be happy to invite you to stay in touch with me, use LinkedIn or my email address. If any of you just want to talk about this stuff, I geek out on it. I'm happy to, just jump on a call with you if you want to ask questions or brainstorm, share ideas. And there's no charge for that. It's just like, I like working with entrepreneurs and I like working with growth companies. Okay, thank you very much. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
So Kevin, fantastic. I do have a couple of questions here, and if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or take yourself off mute and ask. So, what are the cheapest and fastest ways for a lean startup to test whether a problem is truly painful enough to solve?
The cheapest and fastest?
For a lean startup.
Yeah. Okay. So, one of the great advantages of this process is it's something that AI cannot replicate. Having said that, just go out and bomb away on AI and internet searching everything you can possibly find about the nature of that problem. That will get you partway there. Like, just research it, doing your own primary, like secondary research into the market. And then cheap and fast would be if you can't go through a formal process like this, just host a couple dinners with 4 or 5 people each and take people out to dinner or lunch and just say, I'm going to buy you dinner, buy you lunch, go to a nice restaurant and just sound them out.
Okay, very good. What customer conversations or behaviors do founders tend to overinterpret?
They tend to overemphasize good news. They tilt toward a confirmation bias in the feedback they get. And they tend to dismiss information or signals that are out of alignment with their confirmation bias. So by that, it's just like confirmation biases from behavioral economics and psychology. It's just like, people tend to see evidence that confirms what they're already thinking. And so it's a real trap to work to avoid.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Kevin? Oh, perhaps we do. Okay, so from Brian, your bio mentioned Epic and the pre-Y2K era. The average job tenure of a corporate CIO was about 2 years. IBM leveraged that perception to build a campaign around the slogan, "No one gets fired for buying IBM." In today's market, Epic has adopted the same approach to entrench the slogan, "No one gets fired for buying Epic," into healthcare C-suites. That's irrespective of Epic's extremely high TCO and pre-relational 1960s era tech platform that Epic deploys. How did Epic so embed itself into the conventional wisdom of the healthcare C-suite?
Yes. What an absolutely remarkable experience that was to work with Epic, basically on their startup. Epic did so many things poorly, and they did so many things well. The thing they did well was that all of the rest of us were building these products where we were cobbling together with different parts and pieces and partners. Epic built an integrated platform on outdated technology, but scalable. And as it turned out, healthcare was consolidating more and more and more around integrated delivery systems. So if you live in the Portland area and you're on this call, those systems are, of course, Providence, Kaiser, Legacy and its affiliates, so forth. And Epic benefited from that evolution. Part of it was they kind of saw it happening, but part of it was that's just where they got their early deals. And so they built something that could scale with a big organization. And Medical Logic was kind of a second place company. Our product wouldn't scale. We thought, we touted this Oracle partnership. Like we thought, oh God, Oracle, Silicon Valley, us, them. Like our product and the rest of the competition's products just wouldn't scale and support a big integrated delivery system. And once you captured those and became entrenched, game over. The switching cost is so high and so painful that it's like Epic now owns the world. And when I worked, by the way, with the CEO there, like, again, it was a dinky little company. And we just like, I spent all my time working with her. And she's like, my vision is world domination. And I would kind of laugh. I had no confidence that that company was going to dominate the world for a lot of reasons. And sure enough, they dominate the healthcare world. $6 billion in revenue now, and her net worth is just an epic, about $8 billion.
Amazing. Do you have any other questions? And I really thank everyone for hanging on with us and sticking around. Okay, so Dara says, I think Medical Logic still lives on as Athena Health Practice Management.
I have an answer to that, and then a quick question. Medical Logic is actually not part of Athena Health. It was acquired by GE Medical. And so GE Medical's EMR product is called, I forget. But anyway, GE acquired it for $10 million and used it kind of as it was a cash cow. They didn't put any significant money into developing it. They basically just bought the installed base. And so it's a distance. I don't even know what place they are in the EMR market. And my question was when I asked about 15 or 20 minutes ago, how many of you actually look at your explanation of benefits forms? And I said, please put it in the chat. I don't know if anybody took a look at that and like did a quick look and said, well, it's 50-50 or 90% no, whatever. I'd love to hear what it looked like.
It's actually pretty 50-50.
Okay.
And someone said only if there's a billing issue. And then someone else said, no, I get confused and it's too long.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions from folks?
Brian wanted to follow up and say, correct, it was acquired by GE, then sold to a PE firm, Veritas Capital, which then bought Athena Health and then later sold both properties to PE firm, Bain.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I encourage everyone to continue the conversation with Kevin. Thank you all for your thoughtful and engaging discussion. A special thank you to Kevin for sharing your insights and experience with us today. Let you know that this session has been recorded and the recording link, along with the slide deck, will be shared later this week. We truly appreciate your participation and look forward to welcoming you at another event soon. Don't forget, before you sign off, a brief survey will appear on your screen, so please take a moment to complete that. Your feedback helps us continue to shape programs and topics that matter most to you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.